What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one I'm going to be going over everything that you guys need to know ahead of your drafts this fantasy football season. This will be where I'll be recapping all of the offseason moves and all of the training camp hype and news and updates around every single team that's happened between the end of last football season and going up to this date right now. This will be everything that you guys want to know in terms of what's transpired for each roster going ahead into this season, what's going to change compared to this season compared to last season, so that you guys can have all that information in hand going into your fantasy football drafts. Make sure that you guys basically gives you the benefit of having stayed up to date throughout the whole course of the offseason, whether you did or not. Make sure that you just have all the information that you need to know. Obviously, this is going to be a really long video. It'll be going over all 32 teams, so maybe you'll grab something to drink, grab a snack. It's going to be a long one, but I think it'll be really useful, and consider this like a really good summary, just a way to get yourself back into the whole news cycle, the whole fantasy football feed, and really be a nice place to start your research this season. So really hope you guys do like this video. If you do like it at the end of it, please do give me a thumbs up on the YouTube channel. It really helps with the algorithm. Helps know that I'm doing a good job, and obviously this one took quite a bit of time to put together, so we'd really appreciate all the support you can give me there. As well as if you want more content like this, I'll be putting out more videos every single day this off season. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It's at like 570 subscribers right now. I'd love to hit 1,000 by the end of the NFL or start of the NFL season. I think we can do it. It's gonna be really tough, but it's been really cool seeing the channel grow this much, and it's really cool that many of you guys care what I have to say. So it's really fun making these videos, and I love doing it. So yeah, let's get into the first team here. So starting us off with the Philadelphia Eagles, to start their offseason, they lost Miles Sanders in free agency going to the Carolina Panthers. They replaced him pretty quickly, signing Rashad Penny to a one-year prove-it deal and then trading for DeAndre Swift during the NFL draft. Penny is likely going to operate as the Sanders role here while DeAndre Swift takes third down work and pass-catching work. It's possible that either one of these guys could really take over for this team. I think that in general, though, we're going to need an injury to one of these two for either one to really truly emerge as an elite option. The Eagles also extended Jalen Hurts, which is great news for Dynasty. We could also see the Eagles look to maybe be a little bit more pass-heavy this season, run Jalen Hurts a little bit less, just sort of preserve his body, given how committed they are to him in the future now. But that's more of a projection here. I wouldn't expect too much to change in that regard. And they also lost several key defensive members. This could be a team that we could see a significant downturn in terms of how good their defense is this season. And if that happens, there could be reason to expect the Eagles to need to score more in the second half of the season. We could see even more fantasy production out of the Eagles this season than we did last season. Next up, we've got the New York Giants. They were pretty busy this offseason. They traded for Darren Waller right before the NFL draft. They also extended Daniel Jones and retained Saquon Barkley despite some turmoil surrounding his contract situation. They tried to franchise tag him. He didn't sign the franchise tag. He was going to hold out for about a day, and then he signed a one-year deal. So he'll be in New York this season. Still up in the air. We'll see about next season. They also drafted Jalen Hyatt in the second round this season. He's going to be a true deep threat for this team, might operate ahead of Jarius Slayton on the offense, and they also signed basically a million slot wide receivers. They've got Paris Campbell, Jamison Crowder. They obviously have Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard. They still have Isaiah Hodgins, Jalen Hyatt, like I mentioned. They signed Cole Beasley as well. They've got, if there's a slot receiver that was on the free agency market this season, the Giants signed them. I doubt that most of them will make the team, but it just makes it really tough to project this Giants passing offense. I think that in general, it's probably going to be an offense that runs through the legs of Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. Darren Waller should project to be the number one target in this offense, but I don't necessarily know if that means he's going to be a super relevant fantasy option, given just how low of a passing volume and passing success I expect this team to have. So in general, I think we're going to see pretty much a rerun of last season for this team. Maybe there's a relevant pass catcher, and if it is, it's probably going to be Darren Waller. But outside of that, I think you can pretty much just look at Daniel Jones as a bye-week streamer and look at Saquon Barkley as a high-end running back, and everyone else you can effectively ignore aside from Darren Waller this season. Up next for the Commanders, they had a pretty inconspicuous offseason. They didn't really add much at the quarterback position, so Sam Howell's in line to be the starter at quarterback. Jacoby Brissett should operate as the backup, and obviously, given that it's the Washington Commanders, we'll probably see both these quarterbacks throughout the course of the season, although I do like Sam Howell quite a bit. I think he does have a legitimate shot to be a starting caliber NFL quarterback. They also brought in Eric Bieniemy as their offensive coordinator. He should improve the quality of this offense. I'd expect him to be just a little bit better than they've been in the past. Bieniemy's a guy that I do trust to run a quality offense. I don't know exactly if they just have the weapons, especially at the quarterback position, to make it a really top-tier offense, but their pass catchers are elite. I really do like their running backs and Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson does look like he's more in line to operate as the third down back now that J.D. McKissick's gone. So I think that both Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson could also slide in here as like low-end running back twos this season, especially in PPR formats. I would lean towards Antonio Gibson, but in non-PPR formats, I think Brian Robinson's a guy you could use as well. I also think that Jahan Dotson should take a step forward this season, although I just don't know if there's enough passing volume to go around for him to be a truly useful fantasy option, given that Terry McLaurin's probably just going to operate as the number one for sure this season. Next up, we've got the Dallas Cowboys. Zeke Elliott's gone. He's still been floating around looking for a team. So it's still possible Ezekiel Elliott does come back to Dallas, but assuming he doesn't, this is going to be an offense that runs through Tony Pollard at the running back position. They also traded for Brandon Cooks in the offseason, so their wide receiver core is much better than it was last season. They've got their number 2 to go outside of CeeDee Lamb, and also Michael Gallup's looking much healthier in training camp. He should be back to full health after really having just sort of what was a down year last season. You could maybe give some excuses for from his injury perspective. They also fired Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator and brought in Brian Schottenheimer. To me, that's a downgrade. Brian Schottenheimer always runs a pretty passive, run-heavy offense, a team that doesn't really want to throw the ball downfield very much, and I think they're really going to try and win games with their defense and running game. It's going to really limit some of the upside of these passing weapons, and on top of that, they drafted Deuce Vaughn pretty late in the draft, but he's gotten really strong reports out of camp. He could be a guy that steals some pass-catching work from Tony Pollard, and that could potentially limit his upside, although Pollard's still going to get the lion's share of the work in this backfield. Up next, we've got the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers was traded to the New York Jets, and there are mixed reports on Jordan Love. He's obviously had his growing pains in training camp, but he's also made some nice plays as well. It'll be interesting to see how he performs. I would, in general, project him to be like a fringe top 20 offense this season led by Jordan Love. I don't think they're going to be by any means above average, but I don't think they'll be a dumpster fire either. Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb, and Robert Tonyan all departed this season. All go into new teams. They drafted Jaden Reed in the late second round. And Luke Musgrave was drafted by them at tight end. He's looked great in camp. It looks like he's going to be their starting tight end to start the season. Also, reports out of camp are that Romeo Doubs is again really impressing. It's quite possible that Romeo Doubs emerges as like the number 1 target in this offense, even though I would obviously expect Christian Watson to lead the team in receiving yards and touchdowns, just given that he's a much more explosive player. But Doubs seems to be a guy that they trust, and he's definitely not a bad wide receiver at all. So I don't really know what the fantasy relevance of a lot of these guys are. I think Aaron Jones is obviously a lock to be fantasy relevant. A.J. Dillon's like a really low-end running back 3 for me, and then Christian Watson's probably like a high upside wide receiver 3 for me, and everyone else is just like at best a flex play. So not super in love with this offense. Should be just in general worse than it was last season, but there should be still some fantasy relevance here. Next up, we've got the Chicago Bears. They traded for DJ Moore ahead of the NFL draft, having the number 1 overall pick, and traded to the Panthers, allowed them to get DJ Moore and really just build more of an overall quality roster. They also signed Robert Tonyan and Mercedes Lewis at tight ends. They've now got 3 pretty quality tight ends and a good wide receiver core. They also signed Deonta Foreman and drafted Roschon Johnson for their running back room. David Montgomery departed to go to the Detroit Lions. So they've got a pretty messy backfield right now in Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, and Deonta Foreman. All reports out of training camp right now are that is the running backs pecking order, where you'll have Khalil Herbert as the 1, Roschon Johnson as the 2, and Deonta Foreman as the 3. Obviously, depth charts at this point in the season are really just murky, but I personally would lean towards Khalil Herbert if I were going to pick one of these running backs, but I think they'll all get some work throughout the course of the season, and honestly, this is going to be a team that's not going to throw the ball to the running backs, and I just don't know how much value there's going to be there. I think that DJ Moore does give Justin Fields a legitimate shot to potentially take a step forward this season, although I just haven't seen it from Justin Fields. I'm not going to project it, given that DJ Moore never really elevated any of the quarterbacks in Carolina either. I don't know that Justin Fields is a better passer than the guys Carolina gave DJ Moore, so I think it could be just more of the same for DJ Moore this season, and I don't know if you can really expect much more from Justin Fields than what you got last season. Next up, we've got the Detroit Lions. They drafted Jahmyr Gibbs with their first-round pick and signed David Montgomery in free agency. They basically swapped out their running backs this season, having traded DeAndre Swift and letting Jamal Williams go to the New Orleans Saints. Reports out of camp right now are that both running backs are going to be on the field quite a bit. Gibbs could easily see slot snaps, so it's being reported right now that when David Montgomery comes onto the field, Jahmyr Gibbs just goes out and plays slot. So I think both these guys will be on the field a ton this season. Jameson Williams was suspended for 6 games for a gambling violation. That opens up the door for potentially Sam Laporta to be involved. He's their rookie tight end they drafted early on in the season, early in the draft. He's looked good in camp. He could be a guy that could be like a nice, late round dart throw, a guy that you could play at tight end for the first 6 weeks if you wait on the position, although we all know that rookie tight ends generally have a tough time really acclimating themselves to the NFL. And then, probably doesn't matter, but Marvin Jones has also returned to Detroit. He could have a couple spike weeks, especially while Jameson Williams is gone, but I wouldn't expect too much fantasy relevance out of him. For the Minnesota Vikings, they drafted Jordan Addison in the first round. He's there to easily fill the hole left by Adam Thielen. I think we could expect pretty big things out of Jordan Addison this season. Adam Thielen ran the 2nd most routes in the NFL last season. This team's going to pass the ball a ton, and Jordan Addison's a really good player. Obviously, the first depth chart came out for the Minnesota Vikings. They've got Jordan Addison listed as 4th on the depth chart. Don't read into that at all. Jordan Addison's declared number 2 wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. If you remember just a few years ago, Justin Jefferson was listed as their wide receiver 3 during training camp. It's just something this team does with their rookies. I would have no concern drafting Jordan Addison to be their wide receiver 2 here. Dalvin Cook was released by the Minnesota Vikings. That puts Alexander Mattison in line to be the lead back for this team. I think we can expect him to be like a high-end running back 2, maybe like a mid-tier running back 2 this season. And they also drafted Dwayne McBride in the 6th round. He and Tyson Chandler will be competing for the backup running back role, which if something were to happen to Alexander Mattison would certainly have value. But outside of that, I wouldn't expect too much value from that position other than Mattison. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, obviously Tom Brady's retired. Baker Mayfield's the likely starter to start Week 1, although it's possible that Kyle Trask could win that job or see some playing time throughout the course of the season if the Buccaneers struggle. Fournette left the team, still a free agent, so it really does open up really opens up an opportunity here for Rachaad White to just see a ton of volume, especially in the passing game, although as of right now, Chase Edmonds is listed as the likely 3rd down back, so if that's the case, then that means that Rachaad White hasn't really put a stranglehold on it. It could be a rough season for him if he's not going to catch too many passes. I will just note that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are still there. Obviously, they're really talented wide receivers. I think they can both be like low-end wide receiver 2s this season, but I expect really limited passing volume from this team. They're going to try and win games with their running game and their defense, and it's going to be tough for these guys to be truly elite fantasy performers like they have been in the past. Next up, we've got the New Orleans Saints, who signed Derek Carr this offseason. He's going to be their starting quarterback. I think he's going to really do a lot to elevate this offense, and Chris Olave is going to be the main beneficiary of that, although I think guys like Rashid Shaheed and Michael Thomas could have some better seasons than they did last season. They also added Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller to their backfield. Jamal Williams coming from Detroit, and Kendre Miller being a guy that they really like. They drafted him in the 3rd round, and they really do think he could be a really talented running back for them. Alvin Kamara was suspended for the first 3 games of the NFL season, so there will be an opportunity for both Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller to see meaningful touches for the first 3 weeks of the season. They've also been linked to Kareem Hunt. It looked like he was likely to sign there before reports came out that the Colts offered more money to Kareem Hunt, so now Kareem Hunt's going to visit with the Indianapolis Colts. So we'll see how that plays out, but as of right now, Kareem Hunt has not signed with any of these teams. If he were to go to New Orleans, I think it'd be a horrible fit for everybody involved. It would kind of just blow up the whole backfield, and I'd want nobody. And if he goes to Indianapolis, it probably means worse things for Jonathan Taylor, but I'll touch on that later. They also signed Foster Moreau and Jimmy Graham. It's crazy that Jimmy Graham's still in the league. I thought that signing was going to be just like a sign for one day to retire as a Saint, but nope, Jimmy Graham's back in the NFL. Foster Moreau, really cool story in terms of beating his cancer this offseason, so really happy for him. Hopefully he can perform well, but I don't think in general this tight end position in New Orleans is going to mean much for fantasy. Next up, we've got the Atlanta Falcons. They drafted Bijan Robinson 8th overall. He's just going to be a stud. They've got a really great offensive line, and even though we saw Tyler Algier be really meaningful and really good for them last season, spending a high draft capital pick on a running back like this just means that he's going to be your workhorse. Bijan's going to catch a ton of passes, have a ton of rushing yards, be a guy that, honestly, if you want to take him 1st overall, I don't blame you. I wouldn't do it, but I totally see the rationale, and I wouldn't really have a huge problem with it. Desmond Ridder looks like he's poised to be the Week 1 starter, although Taylor Heineke was brought in to be the backup. Given that I don't expect much out of Desmond Ridder, we could see playing time for both these quarterbacks throughout the course of the season. They also signed Matt Collins to be kind of their wide receiver 2. All this offense from a passing standpoint should run through Drake London and Kyle Pitts. For the Carolina Panthers, they drafted Bryce Young with the 1st overall draft pick in the NFL draft. They also signed Miles Sanders to a large 4-year deal this offseason. He's going to be their clear workhorse back. He's going to be a guy that I think is going to catch a lot more passes than he did in Philadelphia and should easily see 250, 300 touches this season. They also completely rebuilt their pass catching room. They signed Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, and drafted Markevius Mingo. They've also signed Hayden Hurst to be their tight end. There's still guys like Terrace Marshall and Laviska Shenault here, though. So I think that in general, this is going to be a team that's going to be tough to really trust many of the pass catchers. If I was going to bet on anybody, I would bet on DJ Chark to be the leader of this pass catching room. And really, though, if I'm drafting anyone on the Panthers, it's going to be Miles Sanders. I don't know if I'm interested in anyone else this season. Next up, we've got the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray is still recovering from his torn ACL last season. The timeline's still very up in the air for him, but I would personally expect him to play about half the season. Obviously, he could still play really early on. It's also possible that he could miss the whole season. So for most of my projections, I'm just assuming he plays half the season. We'll have to play that one by ear. They also released DeAndre Hopkins. That makes Marquise Brown the de facto number 1 wide receiver in this offense, with guys like Rondale Moore, Michael Wilson, their 3rd round draft pick, and Greg Dortch also in line to receive snaps. I think Trey McBride is another guy that could take a step forward at the tight end position, although Zach Ertz is also rumored to be actually healthy enough to play football this season. I just thought Ertz would retire, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So in general, I don't want a whole lot to do with this Cardinals offense this season. I think James Conner is going to be a guy that could just volume his way to being really relevant. I think Marquise Brown is going to be a guy that's good enough and should see enough targets to be good. But outside of them, I think Rondale Moore is the only one with a realistic shot of fantasy upside, and that really to me is only if Kyler Murray comes back and plays enough games to sustain this offense. Next up, we've got the Los Angeles Rams. Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp are back, so this offense should be much better, although it's important to note that Cooper Kupp is already dealing with a hamstring injury. Hamstring injuries for older wide receivers in training camp are certainly scary. They have a much higher risk of re-injury throughout the course of the season, so I would be a little bit more concerned about drafting Cooper Kupp in the early first round this season. They made no major additions to the running back position, so Cam Akers is in line to be the workhorse running back for this Rams team. Puka Nacua is their most notable add at the wide receiver position. That pretty much means that Van Jefferson's locked in the number 2 role, and then guys like Tutu Atwell, Ben Skowronek, and Puka Nacua will have shots to be the number 3 here. And they're effectively running it back with what they had last season. Effectively 2 years ago, they're hoping to be just as good as they were 2 years ago. I would expect them to be like about a 500 team with a decent offense and a bad defense. If everybody stays healthy, there should be a lot of fantasy goodness here, but there's obviously a lot of risk associated with the injuries on these guys. Next up, we've got the San Francisco 49ers. All signs point towards Brock Purdy being healthy enough to be the Week 1 starter, although Trey Lance has reportedly had a much better training camp this season. They also signed Sam Darnold, who they do like quite a bit, surprisingly. They've been no real turnover at the roster outside of that. I will also note that Elijah Mitchell is already dealing with a minor injury. This is always a team that has plenty of injuries at the running back position, especially Elijah Mitchell, so it'll be interesting to see who the handcuff behind Christian McCaffrey is. I would still bet on it being Elijah Mitchell, but I think guys like Jordan Mason, Tyrion David Price would certainly have cause to be rostered in drafts if Elijah Mitchell were to be a guy that misses significant time this season. Next up, we've got the Seattle Seahawks. They drafted Jackson Smith-Njigba in round 1. He's likely going to operate as just a really good number 3 wide receiver for this team, but it's certainly possible that he could be a star. He could technically surpass both Metcalf and Tyler Lockett on this depth chart. He's that kind of prospect. He's a really good player. I wouldn't bet on that happening just yet this season, but he's really good. It does add some risk to the Lockett and Metcalf draft positions. They also drafted Zach Charbonnet in round 2. He's a legitimately good prospect. He was dealing with a shoulder injury, but he's back in practice. And Kenneth Walker's still dealing with a groin injury right now. So Charbonnet is going to challenge Kenneth Walker for touches this season. I'm personally concerned that Kenneth Walker is going to cede pass catching and goal line work to Charbonnet. It's going to make it really tough for him to be a meaningful fantasy contributor. So I'm worried about the running back room in general. I think it could be a little murky. They also re-signed Geno. He's likely going to be here for the next 2 years. And honestly, he was really good last year. They've got plenty of wide receiver weapons. So this will be a pretty good offense this season. Next up, we've got the Buffalo Bills. They drafted Dalton Kincaid in round 1. He's probably going to operate as their effectively slot wide receiver in this offense, having lost Isaiah McKenzie and Jamison Crowder this offseason. Khalil Shakir is a nice prospect at the slot receiver position as well. I think he's got a legitimate shot to see more targets this season as well. They replaced Devin Singletary with Damian Harris and Latavius Murray. James Cook here is likely going to see the majority of the snaps as the main running back in this offense, but he's not going to receive goal line work. That's going to go to one of those 2 running backs, and I think that, in general, the touchdown upside is obviously going to be limited. I'd also note that Nyheim Hines is going to miss this entire season due to a jet ski accident, so James Cook will be the pass-catching back for this team, although that's not really a role that's been super valuable. So there's a lot of question marks surrounding this offense. Maybe they'll pass the ball to the running backs more, and James Cook could be super valuable, but he's not going to score many touchdowns, and I find myself just sort of being out on him. For the New York Jets, they obviously traded for Aaron Rodgers this offseason. On top of that, they brought over his friends Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb. Garrett Wilson's going to be the clear number 1 wide receiver for this team, but if I had to bet, Allen Lazard probably operates as the number 2, with Corey Davis being the number 3 here. Breece Hall is still not fully recovered from his ACL injury. He should be able to play even as early as week 1, but the Jets have been vocal about actively looking for more running back depth here. Israel Abanikanda was drafted by them in the NFL draft. It doesn't look like he's really done much in training camp. It looks like Michael Carter is still currently the backup behind him, and they've also been really vocal about trying to sign guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook. If they sign one of those guys, I would be much more concerned about Breece Hall, and honestly, the fact that they're looking for another running back like that says to me that Breece Hall is just not as healthy as they want him to be right now, so I would draft Breece Hall with a healthy dose of skepticism and caution this season. Next up, we've got the New England Patriots. They signed Juju Smith-Schuster to replace Jacoby Myers, who departed to the Las Vegas Raiders this season. They also signed Mike Gesicki to be their, again, number 2 tight end. This is a team that, for whatever reason, loves having 2 tight ends on the roster that they can catch passes. Damian Harris departed to Buffalo this offseason. The Patriots have held several free agent visits with several different running backs, including Kareem Hunt, Ezekiel Elliott, Darrell Henderson, Leonard Fournette. A lot of these guys are going to be rumored to sign with the Patriots, and given that they've looked for so many, I would highly expect them to sign somebody. Depending on who they sign, it will affect my ranking of Ramondre Stevenson, but if the depth chart were to stay as is, I think Ramondre's got a legitimate shot at top 5 season. They also actually hired an offensive coordinator this season in Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien should run a much more professional offense than what they had last season, so in general, I expect this offense to be much better than it was last season, and I don't really know where the production is going to come from, because I don't think they have really any true star power. I think Devontae Parker could be a nice dart throw. Tyquan Thornton's looked really bad in camp, so I'm not really excited about him. Juju's still dealing with an injury of his own, so it could be a bad offense just because I don't think the weapons are there, but it can't really be much worse than it was last season. Next up, we've got the Miami Dolphins, who really didn't have too much turnover this offseason. They drafted Devon Achane in round 2 to be that home run hitter at the running back position. He should operate as like the Chase Edmonds role, what we really thought Edmonds was going to get last season. He'll be their pass catching back, be a guy that could certainly have some explosive plays this season. They also let Mike Gesicki walk. He signed with the New England Patriots, as I mentioned earlier, and they also signed Chosen Anderson, formerly known as Robbie Anderson. He could be a deep threat, but I wouldn't really care to even look his way, aside from maybe he's like a last round draft pick in best ball. They're also rumored to be involved in the Dalvin Cook sweepstakes. If they sign Dalvin Cook, then Dalvin Cook will be the only running back worth rostering in Miami. If they don't, there's definitely going to be somebody that produces at running back for Miami. I don't really know who it's going to be. I would lean towards drafting Devon Achane, just betting on the youth and the explosive player there. But all three of Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson and Devon Achane do have legitimate shots to be somewhat fantasy relevant this season. Next up, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers. They signed Allen Robinson to be their wide receiver 3 this season. I sure hope that means nothing. They also drafted several offensive linemen and Darnell Washington, a massive, really talented blocking tight end out of Georgia. Their offensive line should be much improved this season. It should help both those running backs be more efficient runners. There are no major changes for this team from last season. If the Steelers are really hoping to take a step forward on offense, it's going to come from Kenny Pickett taking a step forward. He was honestly brutal last season. He had one of the lowest touchdown percentages in terms of touchdowns per pass thrown in NFL history. We saw Deontay Johnson have 0 receiving touchdowns. I think all those things could improve this season, but the roster itself did not get much better this offseason, just betting on these guys getting better themselves. So I'd expect, again, like a fringe top 20 offense this season. Nothing special, but maybe a little bit better than what it was last season. Next up, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals. They lost Samaje Perine in free agency, going to the Denver Broncos. They also drafted Chase Brown in the 5th round. He's likely going to operate as the number 2 running back behind Joe Mixon, who took a pay cut this offseason. Joe Mixon's also dealing with a lawsuit that could result in a suspension if he loses, but that suspension would likely take place next season if it happens. Hayden Hurst departed in free agency, and the Bengals added Irv Smith Jr. as their tight end. Irv Smith is an explosive player, a guy that I like, so if you want to take a dart throw on him in fantasy drafts late, I think he's a guy that you could look to draft. Joe Burrow's also dealing with a calf strain. He should be ready for week 1, but keep an eye on it. Jamar Chase has been vocal about thinking that Burrow should take it easy, sit out till week 5, and just make sure that things fully healed. So we'll see what happens. I would still expect Joe Burrow to play week 1, but they could be really cautious with it and just make sure to keep him safe there. So just make sure you keep an eye on it, and that's why we want to have our fantasy drafts as late in the offseason as possible, so that that way you have the most information you can possibly have about injuries like this. Next up, we've got the Baltimore Ravens. They've got a new offensive coordinator, letting Greg Roman go and just assigning Todd Monken. He's been very vocal about a desire to be a more pass-heavy offense this offseason. They've also revamped their wide receiver room. They drafted Zay Flowers and signed Odell Beckham Jr. Rashad Bateman's working his way back from injury, and they extended Lamar Jackson to a really high-paid contract. This is going to be a team that's going to try to throw the ball a lot more than they have in the past, and Monken's been pretty successful doing that in his NFL career, coaching career as well. On top of that passing game, J.K. Dobbins is currently holding in. He's at training camp, but he's not working out or participating in practice. He's hoping for a new contract. I don't expect that to happen for him this offseason. He's really never proven that he can stay healthy. I expect him to come back and play week 1, but him missing all this training camp time is certainly concerning. They've also already brought in other bodies. They signed Melvin Gordon. I don't think Melvin Gordon's going to be fantasy relevant at all, but it does just sort of muddy the waters a little bit for J.K. Dobbins right now. Next up, we've got the Cleveland Browns. Kareem Hunt's departed. He's still a free agent, so it'll be interesting to see where he lands. But this does mean that Chubb could see legitimately more pass-catching work and really just take himself to the next level in fantasy this season. The likely backup, Jerome Ford, is dealing with a hamstring injury of his own, so that really just opens up the door for Nick Chubb to be the true workhorse back for this offense, even though he already is that. They do have Demetric Felton, who could operate as a pass catcher as well, but he's not very talented. I would truly expect Nick Chubb to be the focal point of this offense. They also traded for Elijah Moore from the New York Jets. He's got a legitimate shot to operate as the number 2 wide receiver behind Amari Cooper. He's looked really good in camp, and all reports are that he's got a shot to be a really quality starter for them. They also drafted Cedric Tillman, who's impressing at camp. He's another wide receiver they like. Really, this offense is going to come down to whether or not Deshaun Watson can regain his Houston Texans form. I'd expect him to finish somewhere in the middle of where he was last season and where he was in Houston. Be like a good quarterback, not great, and this offense should be much better than what it was last season. Next, we've got the Tennessee Titans. Their major offseason addition was signing DeAndre Hopkins to a 2-year deal. He's likely going to operate as the number 1 wide receiver in this offense with Treylon Burks behind him. They also drafted Tyjae Spears, who's a much more talented backup running back than what they had in Hassan Haskins last season. He should see more touches than what Haskins got last season, but Derrick Henry's still obviously going to be a workhorse in this offense. They also drafted Will Levis after he slipped and fell to the 2nd round in the NFL draft. If the Titans do struggle, it's possible that he could start as their quarterback if they want to make a change at quarterback, but I will say them signing DeAndre Hopkins here does truly indicate that they want to be a competitive team. They're in it to win it this season, so until they're out of it, I would fully expect Ryan Tannehill to remain the starter. The Houston Texans drafted C.J. Stroud, number 2 overall. He's in line to be their starting quarterback all season. They also signed Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz to deals. I don't expect Robert Woods to be very useful. He looked pretty washed in Tennessee last season, and I have no reason to believe he's going to regain anything in this season in Houston. They also signed Dalton Schultz, like I said, who was a really meaningful piece of the Dallas offense. He should be a guy that you could draft really late and has a legitimate shot to be a top 2 target in this offense. They also signed Devin Singletary. He's going to compete for pass catching work and rushing work with Dameon Pierce. Sort of just makes that whole backfield pretty muddy. They also drafted Nathaniel Dell and Xavier Hutchinson, 2 wide receivers that I like quite a bit. I think Nathaniel Dell's got a legitimate shot to be a good slot wide receiver in the NFL. And all reports out of camp, however, are that Nico Collins is going to operate as the clear number 1 wide receiver in this offense. He's their alpha. He's going to be the guy that's probably going to score the most touchdowns. In general, this is a pretty bad pass catching room. I don't expect anybody to really dominate. It's probably going to be a pretty bad offense. And the only one to really get excited about potentially is Dameon Pierce, but he and Devin Singletary are probably going to cannibalize each other and just make it pretty gross all around this season. Next up, we've got the Jacksonville Jaguars, and all reports out of camp are that Calvin Ridley looks legit. He looks like himself. I'd imagine that he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver for Jacksonville this season. They also drafted Tank Bigsby in the 3rd round. He's a really talented running back. You can just look at his name. He's a really big guy as well. He's an explosive athlete. He's likely going to split stats with Travis Etienne. He should still be the number 2, but he does profile to be a really good pass catcher and a guy that can certainly dominate on the goal line. He could steal the meaningful touches from Travis Etienne and just sort of make Travis Etienne a guy that's not as desirable as we think he is. And honestly, we could be viewing Tank Bigsby as a guy that you could be playing as your flex by the end of the season. And if something were to happen to Travis Etienne, then obviously Bigsby would be a really great draft pick. They also extended Evan Ingram this offseason to a 4-year deal. He's going to be there forever. This is going to be a really good offense. I really expect this team to take a huge step forward this season. Next up, we've got the Indianapolis Colts. They drafted Anthony Richardson with the 4th overall pick in the draft. They also drafted Josh Downs in round 3 and drafted Evan Hull, pass-catching running back, in round 6, I believe. Anthony Richardson has reportedly played well enough in training camp to be the starter on opening day. This should be a team that obviously is going to be a run-first offense team that I wouldn't expect too much out of offensively. On top of that, I think Jonathan Taylor is truly the biggest story here. He's unhappy with his contract situation, wanted an extension before he hits free agency and get franchise tag next season, and he's still dealing with his ankle injury, reportedly at least. The Colts are reportedly also visiting with Kareem Hunt. Jonathan Taylor is currently away from the team at the time of this recording, so there is a real possibility, although I think it's not that likely that Jonathan Taylor doesn't play for the Colts this season. He's requested a trade. I doubt it's going to happen. I would still expect Jonathan Taylor to start the season as the Colts running back 1, but you never know. In the NFL, he could be traded. Kareem Hunt signing there would be honestly really great for Kareem Hunt's fantasy value, especially if Jonathan Taylor wasn't there. So keep an eye on that. Obviously, again, keep your drafts scheduled towards the end of the offseason. Get them as close to the start of the NFL season as possible just so that you have all the information when you get to your draft. Next up, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders. Derek Carr left the team going to sign on to the New Orleans Saints. And Jimmy Garoppolo's been brought in to be their starting quarterback this season. Josh Jacobs was holding out after being franchise tagged. There's no real timetable in terms of when he should report back to the team, but my personal bet would be that he comes back and plays week 1 after missing all of training camp. He'll sign that franchise tag. He'll be on the team. Reports have come out that teams like the Chiefs and the Broncos would be interested in signing him should he be made available. I don't know how valid those are. I wouldn't really pay much attention to anything that comes out like that until anything actually happens. They signed Jacoby Myers as well this offseason. He should fill their number 2 wide receiver role behind Devontae Adams. They also traded Darren Waller and drafted Michael Mayer and signed Austin Hooper to fill that tight end position. I don't expect too much production out of the tight end position for this team, but you can obviously expect less this season than you did last season now that Darren Waller's gone. Next up, we've got the Los Angeles Chargers. They extended Justin Herbert, making him the richest quarterback, or the highest paid quarterback on an annual basis in the NFL this offseason. They also drafted Quentin Johnston, a really talented wide receiver, in the 1st round. He looks poised to be the number 3 on this roster to open the season, and honestly, if something were to happen to one of the top 2 guys, he could easily be a guy that ends up being a really high-end fantasy producer this season. There were no additions to the running back room. Austin Eckler is going to be a stud again this season. They also brought in Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator, letting Joe Lombardi go. This should mean that they're going to run a fast-paced, aggressive offense. They're going to throw the ball downfield a lot more than they did last season, and that should mean really great things for Justin Herbert and this offense in general. Next up, we've got the Chiefs. Juju Smith-Schuster left the team in free agency. They drafted Rashee Rice in the 2nd round. Sky Moore is reportedly running with the ones in training camp. He's the guy that I'd be most excited about of the wide receiver room for this team. Isaiah Pacheco is still not cleared for contact. Reports are that he should be ready to go for week 1, but given that we're in early to mid-August at this point and he still hasn't been cleared for contact, I'm a little bit worried. CEH is still there. I think this is going to be a really nasty timeshare at the running back position. Kadarius Toney's already banged up. Again, reports that he should be ready for week 1, but he's missing all of training camp. I think it's going to be a big concern for him. I wouldn't really bet on him taking that step forward, and like I said, if I'm going to place a bet on a Chiefs wide receiver, it would be Sky Moore this season. And last but not least, we've got the Denver Broncos. They brought in Sean Payton as their new head coach. He should run a much more professional organization. This offense should be much better than what it was last season. Javonte Williams looks like he should be ready to go week 1, which is incredible. He's going to be ready to go and even play in the preseason. They did also bring in Samaje Perine to be a clear number 2 for this team. This is going to be a team that's going to utilize both those running backs quite a bit. They drafted Marvin Mims in round 2. He's a really electric deep threat. He'll be the guy that really operates outside of them and really helps take the top off of defenses. Russ is reportedly looking good in camp. He's slimmed down. It should be a team that just all around looks way different than what it did last season. On the downside, Tim Patrick did already tear his Achilles. He'll be likely missing the entire season. KJ Hamler was let go due to a heart condition, and the wide receiver room is suddenly not as deep as we thought it might be. So they're about one injury away from having a real problem at the wide receiver position, but for now I think they still have enough to be really competitive there. So that'll do it for the offseason recap video where I go over everything that you guys need to know heading into your fantasy football drafts this season. Up next, I'll be doing the optimal draft strategy should you have picks 4 through 6 in a snake draft. Hope that you guys found this video useful. Really took a good deal of time. It really helped that I was following the NFL all offseason. Helped me really just sort of summarize everything, put things into context. Obviously, there were probably some things I touched on that weren't as relevant, but if there's anything you guys think I missed, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to give you guys my opinions on all of that as well. Really excited to get into the NFL season here. We're about a month away from opening day. It's going to be super fun. I think it's going to be really great getting into the offseason, really getting into the heat of draft season as well. So really want to be here to help you guys dominate your drafts. I'm going to be here all offseason, bringing you guys a video every single day. If you do like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. It really helps the YouTube algorithm. Helps you know that I'm doing a good job. If you want more content like this, like I said, there'll be a new video every single day this offseason. So please do give me a subscribe. We'd love to have you as a part of the community. If you're interested as well, you can join and be a member. You can $1.99 or something like that. You guys will get priority response to comments. I'll be happy to host some live events as well. We can go over start sits decision, draft day decisions as well, any sort of mailbag stuff. Be happy to answer your guys' questions on those as well. So one other thing as well, there is a subscriber league. It's probably been filled at this point, but if it hasn't, I will put out an announcement on Twitter and on YouTube once that league's been filled. But if it hasn't, you're welcome to email me at zsteel99@gmail.com. If it has not been filled, then and you're one of the first 11 respondees, I'll be sure to send you an invite and get you in that league so we can really have fun building the community there. So it's been a lot of fun making these videos. Love doing this stuff, and it's been really cool to help see the channel, or really cool to see the channel grow so much. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.